Welcome to Top 10 Secret Channel. The most terrifying mysteries you've never heard. Have you ever wondered what happens when a soul leaves its body? Is there a mysterious force waiting to judge the fate of every person? Throughout history, many cultures have recorded chilling stories about enigmatic entities, divine judges, vengeful spirits, or beings from the other world, who hold the power to judge both the living and the dead. Today, Top 10 Secret brings you 10 of the most horrifying stories about soul judges, entities that not only instill fear, but also determine the fate of human souls after death. Are you ready to step into the realm of judgment where no one can escape? Brace yourself, because these stories might just keep you awake at night. Story 1. The Eternal Judgment of the Soul. Where, in a forsaken corner of the world, hidden amidst jagged cliffs and barren lands, lies an ancient temple. Known as the Temple of Eternal Judgment, this accursed structure has been shunned by humanity for centuries. At its heart resides a being of unspeakable terror, the Soul Weigher. This skeletal entity, towering and draped in a tattered black cloak, is said to carry a massive set of scales in its skeletal hands. On each side of the scales sit skulls, glowing faintly in the dim, cursed light of the temple, a grim reminder of the souls it has condemned. The Soul Weigher is no benevolent arbiter of justice. Legends say that it is a corrupted remnant of balance, a creature that once served as a neutral judge of souls but was consumed by darkness. Now it hunts indiscriminately, luring both the guilty and the innocent into its domain, weighing their fates against the sins of humanity and condemning them to eternal torment. The whispers of its legend have traveled through the ages, warning of a fate worse than death for those who dare enter its lair. But for some, the lure of power, knowledge, or even redemption is too strong to resist. The tale begins long ago in the kingdom of Draventhire, a land once thriving but ultimately consumed by greed and war. King Cael Thrin, a ruler obsessed with power, sought to conquer not just lands but also the afterlife itself. He desired immortality and dominion over the souls of the dead. In his quest, he discovered an ancient artifact, the Scales of Eternity, said to be a divine tool for weighing the souls of the departed. Cael commanded his court sorcerers to summon the celestial being that once wielded the scales, promising to use its power to create a perfect kingdom. But the summoning ritual was flawed, tainted by the greed and malice of those involved. Instead of a benevolent entity, they summoned a twisted manifestation of balance, a skeletal judge whose purpose was corrupted by the sins of humanity. The being turned its wrath upon the kingdom, weighing not just the souls of the dead, but also the living. Those it judged unworthy were consumed, their souls added to its scales. Draventhire was annihilated, its lands reduced to ash, its people lost to the void. The temple where the ritual took place became the eternal prison of the Soul Weigher, who continued its grim task of judgment, awaiting new victims to feed its unholy scales. Centuries passed, and the temple faded into myth, its location known only to the most determined or foolish. Among them was Evelyn Carter, a historian obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the legend of the Soul Weigher. She believed that the scales held the secret to understanding life and death itself. Joining her on this dangerous quest were Marcus, a thrill-seeker eager for fame; Nina, a photographer drawn by the promise of capturing the supernatural; Greg, a skeptic determined to debunk the legend; and Lila, a clairvoyant who claimed to feel the presence of the dead. The group's journey led them to a barren wasteland where the air was thick with decay, and the sun seemed unable to pierce the dense gray clouds. The temple loomed ahead, its spires jagged and its walls blackened as if scorched by an ancient fire. As they approached, The group felt an unnatural chill, and the whispers began. Soft at first, then louder, as if the very stones of the temple were alive. "This is it," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. She clutched her notebook tightly, filled with years of research and sketches of the rumored scales. "It's just an old ruin," Greg scoffed, though his bravado wavered as the whispers seemed to echo his name. The temple's interior was a labyrinth of shadows, lit only by the faint, flickering glow of candles that lined the walls. The air was heavy, suffused with the stench of decay and something metallic, like blood. The group's flashlights struggled to pierce the oppressive darkness. At the center of the main chamber stood the Soul Weigher. Its skeletal frame towered over them, its eye sockets glowing with an unholy fire. The massive scales in its hands swayed slightly, as if moved by an invisible force. Skulls filled the scales, their empty sockets staring at the group, and their faint whispers filled the chamber with a symphony of despair. "It's real," Nina breathed, raising her camera. But the moment she snapped a photo, the flash illuminated the Weigher's hollow gaze, and her camera shattered in her hands. "Who dares disturb the judgment?" The Soul Weigher's voice was a deep, resonant growl that reverberated through the chamber. "Step forward, mortals, and face your fate." Marcus, trying to mask his fear, approached the Weigher. "We're just here to look around," he said. "No need to get all dramatic." The Weigher extended a bony hand, and Marcus froze as his name appeared in glowing, blood-red script within the pages of a massive book that materialized before the entity. "Your sins outweigh your virtues," the Weigher intoned. "Your soul is mine." The scales tipped violently, and shadows erupted from the ground, wrapping around Marcus. He screamed as his body disintegrated, leaving only his skull, which the Weigher placed on the scales. The group panicked, scrambling to escape, but the temple's entrance slammed shut with a deafening crash. The whispers grew louder, forming incoherent chants that seemed to mock their terror. One by one, the group was judged. Nina attempted to flee, but was cornered by shadows that dragged her to the Weigher. Her pleas for mercy went unanswered as her soul was torn from her body, her lifeless form crumbling to dust. Greg, the skeptic, tried to reason with the entity, shouting that it was all an illusion. The Weigher's gaze fell upon him, and his name appeared in the book. "Denial does not absolve guilt," the Weigher said, and Greg's body contorted in agony as his soul was ripped away. Lila, the clairvoyant, collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the voices of the dead. She begged Evelyn to save her, but the Weigher's judgment was swift. "You have heard their cries but did nothing," it said, condemning her to join the souls she had once ignored. Evelyn was the last. She stood before the Weigher, trembling but defiant. "I came here for knowledge," she said, "not to die." The Weigher's flaming eyes bore into her. "Knowledge is a burden, and you sought it without understanding the cost." Her name appeared in the book, but instead of condemning her outright, the Weigher paused. "You will carry the weight of what you have seen. Go and spread the truth of my judgment." The temple doors creaked open, and Evelyn stumbled out, the whispers fading behind her. She was the only survivor, but the cost of her escape was written on her face. Her hair had turned white, and her eyes held the haunted look of someone who had seen the abyss. Evelyn returned to civilization, but she was never the same. She wrote feverishly about her experience, warning others to stay away from the temple. Her accounts were dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman. Years later, her body was found lifeless in her study, a single word scrawled in blood on the walls: judgment. The temple remains, waiting in the shadows, its scales ever hungry. The Soul Weigher continues its eternal task, and the whispers grow louder with each passing year. Those who seek it do so at their peril, for once your name is written in the book, there is no escape. Beware the weigher of souls, for its judgment is final, and its hunger is eternal. Story 2. The House of Shadows and the Feast of Souls. In a remote, desolate village, nestled deep within a forest where sunlight seldom touched the ground, there stood a decrepit wooden cottage. Overgrown with thorny vines and cloaked in an eternal mist, the house was a place of whispered fear. The villagers called it the Witch's Cottage, a name spoken only in hushed tones and accompanied by hurried glances over their shoulders. According to legend, the house was home to a malevolent crone who preyed on lost children. With her hollow eyes, cracked skin, and a voice that slithered like venom, she lured unsuspecting souls into her lair with promises of warmth and comfort. What awaited them, however, was a fate far darker than death. Parents warned their children never to stray too close to the forest, for those who entered the witch's domain were never seen again. And yet, on certain moonless nights, faint laughter could be heard echoing from the forest, a haunting melody that sent chills down the spines of even the bravest. One stormy evening, a young girl named Anna, barely 7 years old, became separated from her parents while chasing after her wayward cat. As rain poured and lightning cracked across the sky, Anna stumbled deeper into the woods. She called out for her parents, but the storm swallowed her cries. Through the dense trees, she saw a flickering light, a warm, inviting glow emanating from a small window. Desperate and cold, Anna made her way toward it. The sight of the cottage filled her with a mixture of relief and unease. The wooden walls leaned as if tired from standing too long, and the roof sagged under the weight of decades. Still, the light promised refuge. The door creaked open before Anna could knock, and an old woman appeared. Her face was a tapestry of deep wrinkles, her hollow eyes glinting with an unnatural light. A wide, toothy grin spread across her face. "Come in, child," the woman said, her voice both soothing and sinister. "You must be cold and hungry. Let me take care of you." Inside, the cottage was dimly lit by flickering candles. Shadows danced across the walls, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to move independently of the flames. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and something metallic, something that smelled faintly of blood. The old woman led Anna to a wooden table where a feast had been prepared. Steaming bowls of soup, freshly baked bread, and slices of roasted meat. Anna hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but hunger overpowered her caution. She picked up a spoon and began to eat. As Anna ate, she noticed the meat tasted strange. A metallic tang lingered on her tongue. She glanced at the old woman, who was watching her intently, her grin widening. "You like it, don't you?" the woman asked. "It's a special recipe, passed down through generations." Anna nodded hesitantly, but stopped eating when she noticed something writhing in the corner of her vision. She turned to see a dark figure standing in the shadows. Its form was indistinct, but its glowing red eyes were unmistakable. Anna froze, her spoon clattering onto the table. "Don't worry about them," the old woman said, her tone light. "They're just curious about our guest." The old woman's demeanor changed as Anna tried to stand. Her grin twisted into something monstrous, and her hollow eyes burned with malevolence. She reached out with bony hands, her nails sharp and blackened. "Don't be so quick to leave, my dear," she hissed. "You've only just arrived." The shadows in the room began to move, detaching themselves from the walls and forming into humanoid shapes. They surrounded Anna, their glowing eyes staring into her soul. She screamed, but the sound seemed to vanish into the oppressive air. One of the shadows reached out, its skeletal hand brushing against Anna's face. A coldness unlike anything she had ever felt seeped into her skin, and she collapsed to the floor. The old woman loomed over her, cackling. "Every child who enters my home becomes part of my family," she said. "And you, my dear, will be no different." Anna woke to find herself in a dark, cavernous room. The walls were lined with cages, each one containing a pale, lifeless child. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Anna realized with horror that these were the children who had disappeared from the village over the years. The old woman appeared, carrying a large, leather-bound book. She opened it, revealing page after page of names written in crimson ink. Anna's name was the last entry. "This book holds the souls of all my children," the woman said. "Once your name is written, your soul belongs to me." She reached out with a quill dipped in blood, preparing to finalize Anna's fate. Desperate, Anna looked around for a way to escape. Her eyes landed on a jagged piece of metal lying nearby. With a surge of adrenaline, she grabbed it and slashed at the old woman's hand. The woman shrieked, her form flickering like a dying flame. The shadows recoiled, their hold on Anna loosening. Seizing the moment, Anna bolted toward the exit. The old woman pursued her, her twisted form morphing into something even more monstrous. Her limbs elongated and her jaw unhinged, revealing rows of jagged teeth. She moved with unnatural speed, her cackles echoing through the corridors. Anna burst through the front door and into the stormy night. The forest seemed alive, the trees reaching out to block her path. She stumbled and fell, the old woman closing in behind her. Just as the woman reached for her, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, causing it to collapse. The flames from the strike spread quickly, engulfing the forest and the cottage. The old woman screamed, her body consumed by the fire as the shadows dissipated. Anna was found by a group of villagers the next morning, trembling and incoherent. She tried to explain what had happened, but her story was dismissed as the fevered imaginings of a traumatized child. Years later, the forest regrew, and the legend of the witch's cottage faded into obscurity. But on stormy nights, travelers claimed to see a faint light in the distance, accompanied by the laughter of a young girl and the guttural cackles of an old woman. The witch's cottage still stands, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the next child to stray too far from home. And the feast, forever cursed, awaits its next guest. Story 3. The Reaper of Souls. In a desolate wasteland where the sun burns pale and the wind whispers of long-forgotten horrors, a figure of death itself is said to roam. Known as the Reaper of Souls, this grim specter is a harbinger of despair, wielding a massive scythe forged from the bones of the damned. His form is cloaked in shadow, his skeletal visage hidden beneath a tattered black hood, and his empty eye sockets glow with a malevolent red light. The Reaper appears where life withers and hope dies, haunting cursed lands and abandoned villages. He does not simply take lives. He harvests souls, binding them to his scythe and condemning them to eternal servitude. The ground trembles under his heavy steps, and an unearthly silence follows in his wake. His presence alone is enough to sap the courage from even the bravest hearts. The legends claim that once you meet his gaze, your name is etched into the fabric of oblivion. Escape is futile. The only question is when, not if, he will claim you. Centuries ago, the region now called Arid Hollow was a thriving oasis. The land was fertile, the rivers flowed freely, and the people prospered under the protection of their gods. But prosperity bred greed, and the rulers of Arid Hollow sought to expand their dominion at any cost. They desecrated sacred sites, spilled innocent blood, and made unholy pacts with dark entities to fuel their ambitions. One fateful night, under a blood-red moon, a high priest performed a forbidden ritual to summon an immortal guardian who would protect the kingdom forever. But the ritual was flawed, tainted by the malice of the priest's heart. Instead of a guardian, the reaper of souls emerged from the void. He swept across the land, his scythe cutting down all in his path. The rivers dried, the crops turned to dust, and the kingdom was reduced to a barren wasteland littered with the bones of the dead. The reaper remains bound to Arid Hollow, eternally harvesting the souls of any who dare trespass into his domain. The cursed land itself seems to conspire against intruders, drawing them deeper into its grasp until they, too, fall under the reaper's blade. In modern times, the legend of the reaper has faded into obscurity, dismissed as an old wives' tale. But for a group of 5 adventurers, the lure of Arid Hollow's mystery proves irresistible. Eleanor, an ambitious historian; Marcus, a brash treasure hunter; Clara, a skeptical scientist; Nina, a spiritual medium; and Daniel, a former soldier haunted by his past, set out to uncover the truth behind the myth. Equipped with cutting-edge technology and a determination to document the supernatural, they embark on their journey into the cursed wasteland. As they cross the border into Arid Hollow, a chilling wind greets them, carrying with it faint whispers that seem to call their names. "This place feels wrong," Nina murmurs, clutching her protective talisman. The others dismiss her unease, attributing it to nerves. But as the hours pass, an oppressive atmosphere settles over the group. The air grows colder, the landscape more desolate. The sound of their footsteps is swallowed by the silence, leaving only the eerie whistle of the wind. The group sets up camp near the remnants of an ancient temple, its stone pillars weathered and cracked. Eleanor eagerly examines the carvings, deciphering symbols that speak of divine wrath and eternal damnation. "This confirms the legend," she says. "The Reaper was summoned here as punishment for the kingdom's sins." Marcus rolls his eyes. "It's just a story. Let's focus on finding something valuable." That night, as the group sleeps, Daniel awakens to the sound of faint, shuffling footsteps. He grabs his flashlight and steps outside the tent, his breath fogging in the frigid air. In the distance, he sees a figure standing motionless, a dark silhouette against the pale moonlight. The figure holds a massive scythe, its blade glinting ominously. "Who's there?" Daniel calls out, his voice trembling. The figure tilts its head, and the glow of its eyes pierces the darkness. Daniel stumbles back, but when he looks again, the figure is gone. The next morning, Daniel tells the group about what he saw. Marcus laughs it off, but Eleanor and Nina exchange uneasy glances. "The Reaper is watching us," Nina whispers. As the group ventures deeper into Arid Hollow, their equipment begins to malfunction. Compasses spin wildly, GPS devices display nonsensical coordinates, and their radios emit only static. Tensions rise as the oppressive atmosphere takes its toll. That evening, while exploring the ruins of an old village, Marcus discovers a set of golden coins buried beneath the ash. Ignoring Clara's warnings, he pockets them, a triumphant grin on his face. But as night falls, Marcus begins to hear whispers, soft at first, then louder, until they become an unbearable cacophony. He stumbles out of the tent, clutching his head. The whispers coalesce into a single chilling voice. "You have stolen from the dead." The Reaper emerges from the shadows, his scythe held high. Marcus tries to run, but the ground beneath him splits open, skeletal hands reaching out to drag him down. His screams echo through the night, but when the others rush out, there is no trace of him, only his empty boots and the scattered golden coins. Panic sets in as the remaining members argue over what to do. Clara insists they leave immediately, but Eleanor refuses to abandon the expedition. Nina's connection to the spirit world grows stronger, and she begins to hear the voices of the souls trapped in the Reaper's scythe. "They're begging for release," she says, tears streaming down her face. "They want us to destroy him." Daniel, haunted by his past failures, becomes increasingly paranoid, convinced that the Reaper is targeting him next. His fears are realized when he becomes separated from the group and encounters the Reaper in an abandoned chapel. Despite his training, Daniel's bullets have no effect on the spectral figure. The Reaper's scythe descends, and Daniel's body crumples to the ground, his soul drawn into the blade. By the time they reach the heart of Arid Hollow, only Eleanor, Clara, and Nina remain. They discover a massive circular stone altar inscribed with ancient runes. At its center stands the Reaper, his scythe planted firmly in the ground. Eleanor, driven by a mix of fear and determination, approaches the altar with the intent to document the entity. Clara tries to pull her back, but it's too late. The Reaper raises his scythe, and the runes on the altar begin to glow with a sinister red light. Nina, guided by the voices of the trapped souls, recites a forgotten incantation in a desperate attempt to banish the Reaper. The ground trembles, and the air is filled with the anguished cries of the damned. For a moment, it seems as though the ritual is working, but the Reaper merely laughs, a sound that freezes their blood. "You cannot destroy what is eternal," he says. "All souls belong to me." With a single swing of his scythe, the world around them dissolves into darkness. Weeks later, a rescue team finds the remnants of the expedition's camp. Their equipment is shattered, and their notes are incoherent, filled with frantic scribbles about the Reaper and his domain. Of the 5 adventurers, only Clara's journal remains intact. In her final entry, she describes a vision of endless darkness, where countless souls writhe in torment, their cries echoing for eternity. The cursed land of Arid Hollow remains unclaimed, its secrets buried beneath the sands. And on moonless nights, travelers swear they see a shadowy figure in the distance, the gleam of a scythe glinting in the pale starlight. Beware the Reaper of Souls, for he waits in the shadows, his hunger for souls unending, his scythe ever ready to harvest the living. Story 4. The Bone Queen and Her Umbrella of Shadows. In a forsaken realm where time stands still and death permeates the air, there exists a haunting figure known as the Bone Queen. Once a woman of great beauty and power, she is now a skeletal remnant of her former self, cursed to wander eternally, luring the living into her domain of despair. Her legend is whispered across desolate lands, her name spoken only in hushed tones. The Bone Queen is no ordinary specter. Her appearance is both mesmerizing and terrifying. A skeletal figure adorned in tattered remnants of an elegant gown, her body a macabre blend of decay and grace. She carries a black umbrella, perpetually dripping with an unearthly liquid that resembles tears. Her hair, long and silvery, cascades over her shoulders, framing a skull that seems to smile and sneer at the same time. Around her, small orbs, like imprisoned souls, hover and emit faint, sorrowful cries. Those who encounter her are said to be ensnared by her eerie beauty, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare from which there is no escape. The Bone Queen does not merely claim lives. She collects souls, binding them to her umbrella, which grows heavier with each victim. Every soul she captures strengthens her power, perpetuating her curse and expanding her dominion. Centuries ago, the Bone Queen was a mortal woman named Evelyn de la Croix, the matriarch of a noble family renowned for their wealth and influence. Evelyn was celebrated for her elegance and intelligence, but beneath her refined exterior lay an insatiable hunger for power. Her obsession with immortality led her down a dark path, seeking forbidden knowledge in grimoires and rituals thought to be lost to time. One fateful night, Evelyn performed a ritual she believed would grant her eternal life and unparalleled beauty. The ritual required a sacrifice, the blood of those closest to her. Without hesitation, Evelyn betrayed her family, spilling their blood on an ancient altar beneath her manor. As the ritual concluded, a shadowy figure appeared and granted her wish, but with a cruel twist. Evelyn's body began to wither and rot, her flesh sloughing off until only bones remained. Her beloved parasol, once a symbol of her status, transformed into a cursed artifact capable of capturing souls. Her mansion crumbled into ruin, and the land around it turned barren, becoming a graveyard of despair known as the Wailing Fields. Evelyn was no longer human. She was now the Bone Queen, condemned to harvest souls for eternity. The Wailing Fields are a cursed expanse surrounding the ruins of Evelyn's manor. The ground is littered with bones, and a perpetual mist hangs low, muffling sound and distorting vision. Travelers who wander too close often hear faint whispers calling their names, followed by the soft patter of unseen footsteps. The Bone Queen's manor stands at the heart of the fields, a skeletal structure that seems to pulse with malevolent energy. Its windows glow faintly, as though lit from within by a fire that refuses to die. No one who enters the manor has ever returned. Those who have glimpsed its interior describe a labyrinth of endless halls filled with mirrors that show reflections not of the living, but of the dead. In the modern era, the legend of the Bone Queen became little more than a ghost story, dismissed as superstition. But for a group of thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts, the story was an irresistible challenge. Eleanor, a historian obsessed with uncovering the truth behind myths. Marcus, a skeptical journalist. Nina, a clairvoyant with a penchant for danger. Tom, a documentary filmmaker. And Sarah, a fearless urban explorer, set out to find the Bone Queen's manor and document their experience. The group arrived at the edge of the Wailing Fields on a stormy evening. As they crossed the threshold, the air grew cold and a sense of unease settled over them. The mist thickened and the whispers began. "Do you hear that?" Nina asked, clutching her amulet tightly. "It's just the wind," Marcus replied, though his voice betrayed his unease. The group pressed on, their flashlights cutting through the fog. The manor loomed ahead, its skeletal frame silhouetted against flashes of lightning. As they approached, the whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became an incomprehensible cacophony. The front doors of the manor creaked open on their own, revealing a grand hall illuminated by flickering chandeliers. The air inside was thick and stifling, carrying the faint scent of decay. The walls were adorned with portraits of Evelyn and her family, their eyes seeming to follow the intruders. Eleanor studied the carvings on the walls, recognizing symbols from ancient texts. "This place is a shrine to death," she whispered. The group split up to explore the manor. Tom set up cameras in the main hall, while Nina wandered into a side room, drawn by an unseen force. Marcus followed reluctantly, muttering about how all this was just a setup. Sarah ventured upstairs, her curiosity outweighing her fear. As they explored, the manor began to shift. Doors disappeared, hallways lengthened, and the walls seemed to breathe. The air grew colder, and the whispers became clearer, now distinctly calling each of their names. One by one, the group encountered the Bone Queen. Tom was the first. While adjusting his camera, he felt a chill behind him. Turning slowly, he saw her seated on a decaying throne, her skeletal fingers tapping rhythmically on the handle of her umbrella. "You've come far," she said, her voice a haunting melody. "But this is where your journey ends." Tom tried to run, but the floor beneath him transformed into a sea of skeletal hands pulling him down. His screams echoed briefly before being swallowed by the manor. Nina, guided by her clairvoyance, stumbled into a room filled with mirrors. Each reflection showed her face growing older and more decrepit until it became a skull. The Bone Queen appeared behind her in the reflections, her hollow eyes glowing. "You see your fate," she whispered before Nina's reflection shattered, and with it, Nina herself. Marcus attempted to rationalize what was happening, blaming it on hallucinations. But when he found himself face to face with the Bone Queen, her skeletal grin widened. "Doubt won't save you," she said, her umbrella opening to reveal a swirling void. Marcus was consumed, his soul joining the others trapped within. Eleanor and Sarah were the last. They found each other in the grand hall, the walls now pulsating with shadows. The Bone Queen descended the staircase, her umbrella dripping with the essence of the captured souls. "You've come seeking answers," she said to Eleanor, "but knowledge always comes at a price." Sarah, clutching a broken piece of wood as a makeshift weapon, charged at the Queen. With a flick of her umbrella, the Queen deflected her attack and sent Sarah crashing into the wall. She slumped to the ground, motionless. Eleanor, trembling but determined, held up an ancient talisman she had brought, hoping it would protect her. The Bone Queen paused, her gaze fixed on the object. For a moment, it seemed as though the talisman might work. But then the Queen laughed, a sound that echoed like cracking bones. "No trinket can undo what I am," she said. With a final swing of her umbrella, Eleanor's vision darkened as her soul was torn from her body. When a rescue team arrived weeks later, they found the group's equipment scattered across the wailing fields. The manor was gone, leaving only an empty clearing surrounded by withered trees. The footage from Tom's cameras showed glimpses of the Bone Queen, her hollow eyes staring directly into the lens before the video cut to static. To this day, the wailing fields remain a place of dread. Travelers report seeing a faint figure in the distance, a skeletal woman with a black umbrella. And on stormy nights, the sound of her laughter mingles with the howling wind. The Bone Queen still reigns, her curse unbroken, her umbrella heavy with the weight of countless souls. Beware her domain, for once you enter, there is no escape. Story 5. The Eternal Thrones, the King of Shadows and the Queen of Death. Deep in the forsaken lands where time bends and shadows stretch unnaturally long, lies an ancient castle. This ruin is whispered about in hushed tones, its very name a harbinger of despair. The Castle of Eternal Thrones. The cursed fortress is said to be ruled by two immortal entities, the King of Shadows and the Queen of Death. Once mortal rulers whose ambition and cruelty plunged their realm into an eternal nightmare. The King of Shadows, with his towering presence, wears a blackened crown forged from the bones of his enemies. His hollow eyes are pits of endless night, and his skeletal fingers grip a sword imbued with the torment of countless souls. The Queen of Death sits regally before him, her beauty both mesmerizing and terrifying. Her pale skin glistens like cold marble, and her silver hair flows like liquid moonlight. Her crown glows faintly, emitting an eerie light, and her every movement exudes an air of sinister grace. Legends claim that the two rulers are bound to their thrones by a dark pact made with an ancient god of death. They reign over a kingdom of shadows, where the living are lured into their grasp only to have their souls bound to the castle for eternity. No one who enters their domain returns whole, and the few who survive their encounter are left broken, their minds shattered by what they witnessed. Centuries ago, the kingdom of Noctis was a land of unparalleled beauty and wealth. Its rulers, King Azeroth and Queen Lysandra were revered for their intelligence and charisma, but feared for their ruthless ambition. While the kingdom prospered under their reign, it came at a cost: the relentless conquest of neighboring lands and the enslavement of their people. But Azeroth and Lysandra were not content with mere mortal power. They desired to transcend the limits of their human forms and reign for all eternity. To achieve this, they sought the favor of Umbreus, the god of death and shadows. Umbreus promised them immortality and boundless power, but in return, they would have to offer the souls of their entire kingdom. Blinded by ambition, the king and queen agreed. On the night of the blood moon, a grand feast was held in the castle. As their subjects dined and celebrated, Azeroth and Lysandra performed the dark ritual. The castle trembled, and an unnatural darkness enveloped the kingdom. When dawn came, Noctis was no more. The land was barren, its people gone, their souls consumed in a single night. Only the castle remained, transformed into a monument to death, its walls whispering the anguish of the damned. In the present day, the legend of the Eternal Thrones has become a tale of horror, told around campfires and shared among thrill-seekers. But for a group of paranormal investigators, the story was more than a legend. It was an opportunity. Led by Eleanor, a historian with a fascination for the occult, the team included Marcus, a skeptic and journalist, Clara, a tech-savvy investigator, Nina, a spiritual medium, and Tom, a cameraman with nerves of steel. The team set out to find the Castle of Eternal Thrones, determined to document evidence of its existence. Their journey led them to the edge of a desolate forest, shrouded in perpetual mist. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, and the sounds of the outside world faded away, replaced by an oppressive silence. "This place feels wrong," Nina whispered, clutching her talisman. "The spirits here are restless." Marcus scoffed. "It's just a story to scare people. We'll be out of here in a few hours with nothing but creepy footage." But as they pressed on, the forest gave way to a clearing. There, looming before them, was the castle. Its spires pierced the sky, and its walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air around it was heavy, as if the castle itself was alive and watching them. The group entered the castle through its massive iron gates, which groaned open as though inviting them inside. The grand hall was illuminated by faint, flickering torches, casting shadows that danced unnaturally across the walls. The floor was made of black marble, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and ancient stone. At the far end of the hall stood the Eternal Thrones, each occupied by a figure. The King of Shadows sat rigidly, his hollow eyes fixed on the group. The Queen of Death leaned slightly forward, her pale lips curling into a faint, eerie smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice a melodic echo that seemed to reverberate inside their skulls. "You have traveled far to find us. Tell me, what is it you seek?" Eleanor stepped forward, trying to mask her fear. "We seek the truth. We want to document your story." The Queen chuckled, a sound like the rustling of dead leaves. "Truth? Truth is a heavy burden. Are you prepared to pay its price?" Before Eleanor could respond, the King of Shadows raised his hand. The air grew colder, and the torches flickered violently. "You entered our domain," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Now you belong to it." The doors slammed shut behind the group, and the castle seemed to come alive. The walls shifted, creating new hallways and sealing off exits. The group scattered, each member finding themselves trapped in a different part of the castle. Marcus found himself in a hall of mirrors, each reflection showing him older, decayed, and eventually reduced to a skeleton. The Queen appeared behind him in the reflections, whispering, "You wanted proof. Here it is." The mirrors shattered, and Marcus's screams echoed as his body crumbled to dust. Clara was drawn to the castle's library, where books whispered secrets of forbidden knowledge. Unable to resist, she opened one, only for the words to crawl off the pages and wrap around her, suffocating her until she vanished, leaving the book behind with her name inscribed on its cover. Tom, armed with his camera, attempted to document the chaos. But through his lens, he saw the King of Shadows standing directly behind him. The last footage recorded was the king's skeletal hand reaching out before the screen went black. Nina was lured into the castle's chapel, where the spirits of the damned knelt in silent prayer. The queen appeared, offering her a place among them. When Nina refused, the spirits turned on her, dragging her into the shadows as the queen watched with a satisfied smile. Eleanor, now alone, found herself back in the grand hall. The eternal thrones loomed before her, and the king and queen stared down at her like judges passing sentence. "You sought the truth," the king said. "Now you will become part of it." The queen extended her hand, and Eleanor felt an unbearable pull as her soul was ripped from her body. Her vision blurred, and she found herself standing beside the thrones, her body now a shadowy wraith bound to the castle. Weeks later, a rescue team found the group's abandoned equipment at the edge of the forest. The footage recovered from Tom's camera revealed glimpses of the king and queen, their hollow eyes staring directly into the lens before the video cut to static. To this day, the Castle of Eternal Thrones remains hidden, its location known only to those it chooses to reveal itself to. On moonless nights, travelers claim to see a faint light in the distance, accompanied by the faint laughter of a queen and the guttural commands of a king. The King of Shadows and the Queen of Death still reign, their thrones eternal, their hunger insatiable. And when you hear their whispers, it's already too late. Story 6. The Chessboard of Fate. In the dim corners of forgotten history lies a tale of a mystical chessboard known as the Chessboard of Fate. Not a mere game of strategy, it is said to be a gateway to a darker realm, a portal where lives are gambled and souls are imprisoned for eternity. At its center stands the Queen of Fate, a marble statue that is neither lifeless nor alive. She is the keeper of the rules, the judge of every move, and the executioner of those who defy her. The chess pieces themselves are no ordinary carvings. They are bound with the spirits of those who have lost the game. Each piece holds the torment of its trapped soul, and the board exudes an aura of foreboding, whispering faintly to those who dare approach it. Legends warn that once the first move is made, the game must be played to its bitter end, a test of wit and resolve where the stakes are life and eternal damnation. Centuries ago, in the opulent kingdom of Calderon, King Arion was a ruler consumed by his obsession with controlling destiny. His desire to conquer fate itself led him to seek forbidden knowledge. Deep within the ancient texts of a lost civilization, he uncovered the ritual to summon an artifact of immense power. Ignoring the warnings, he performed the ritual under the light of a blood moon. The artifact that emerged was a chessboard, its surface shimmering with otherworldly energy. A voice emanated from the void, offering the king the power to manipulate the threads of destiny through the game. But the voice warned. The price for such power would be steep. Arion eagerly agreed. At first, he used the chessboard to vanquish his enemies, forcing rival kings to play against him, only to watch them succumb to the board's curse. But his greed soon turned against him. One fateful night, the Queen of Fate manifested, her stony gaze fixed on Arion. "You have played too many games, mortal," she said. "Now you shall play for eternity." From that night on, the kingdom of Calderon fell into ruin, its people vanishing, leaving behind only the cursed chessboard and the eternal presence of the queen. In the present day, the legend of the chessboard of fate has faded into obscurity, dismissed as a myth. Yet for a group of curious explorers, the allure of the legend was too tempting to resist. Eleanor, a historian obsessed with uncovering ancient artifacts, Marcus, a skeptical journalist, Clara, a tech-savvy investigator, Nina, a spiritual medium, and Tom, a thrill-seeking cameraman, set out to locate the chessboard rumored to be hidden within the ruins of Calderon. The journey led them to the heart of a decaying castle, its walls covered in vines and its halls echoing with whispers. In the castle's grand hall, they found it. A massive chessboard inlaid with obsidian and ivory, the Queen of Fate standing at its center. Her eyes seemed to follow them, and the air around the board was thick with an oppressive energy. "It's just a game," Marcus said, his voice tinged with doubt. "What's the worst that could happen?" As if in response to his words, the Queen's eyes glowed faintly, and her voice resonated through the hall. "You have come seeking answers. The game will provide them, but only if you have the courage to play." Without waiting for agreement, the chess pieces moved on their own, arranging themselves for a game. The Queen extended her hand, gesturing for the group to make the first move. Eleanor hesitated but stepped forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. She moved a pawn. The moment her hand left the piece, the room darkened, and a chilling wind swept through the hall. The Queen's smile widened. "Let the game begin." It quickly became clear that the game was no ordinary chess match. Each move they made carried consequences. When Marcus moved a knight, a faint scream echoed through the hall, and one of the pieces shattered into dust, releasing a shadowy figure that dissolved into the Queen's outstretched hand. "Every piece holds a soul," Nina whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "And every move determines their fate." As the game progressed, the group began to experience visions. Clara saw herself reflected in the polished surface of the board, but her reflection aged rapidly, decaying until it was nothing but a skeleton. Tom's camera captured fleeting images of ghostly figures circling the board, their hollow eyes filled with despair. The Queen watched silently, her presence a constant reminder of the stakes. "Each move brings you closer to the truth," she said. "But the truth is not always what you desire." The first to fall was Marcus. Frustrated and desperate, he made a reckless move, sacrificing a rook. The moment the piece was taken, Marcus screamed and collapsed. His body turned to ash, and his soul was absorbed into the board, his face appearing on one of the pawns. Clara tried to analyze the game, searching for a way to win, but the rules kept changing. Each time she thought she understood, the board would shift, and the Queen's mocking laughter would echo through the hall. When Clara moved a bishop, her vision blurred, and she felt herself being pulled toward the board. Her last words were a plea for forgiveness before she too was consumed. Only Eleanor and Nina remained. The board was nearly empty, the remaining pieces glowing faintly. "There has to be a way to end this," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "The only way to win is to sacrifice the king," Nina replied, her voice distant as if she were channeling the spirits of the board. "But that means one of us must stay." Eleanor looked at the Queen, whose expression betrayed no emotion. "If I sacrifice myself, will you let her go?" she asked. The Queen tilted her head. "The choice is yours, but the game must end." Eleanor moved her king, placing it in checkmate. The board erupted in light, and the Queen's laughter filled the room. Eleanor felt her body disintegrating, her essence pulled into the board. As her vision faded, she saw Nina running toward the exit, the Queen's voice echoing in her mind. The game never truly ends. Nina escaped the castle, but she was not the same. Her eyes were hollow, and her voice carried a strange, otherworldly tone. She returned to civilization, spreading tales of the cursed chessboard and the Queen of Fate. But those who listened to her stories found themselves drawn to the ruins of Calderon, unable to resist the call of the game. The chessboard remained, its pieces reset, its queen waiting for the next players to challenge her. The chessboard of fate endures, an eternal trap for the curious and the ambitious. And when the first move is made, the queen of fate will smile, for she knows that every soul belongs to her in the end. Story 7. The Whispering Skeleton. In a forgotten village nestled deep within a valley shrouded in eternal mist, a haunting tale echoes through the years. The villagers speak in hushed tones of a skeletal figure known as the Whisperer. Unlike other spirits, the Whisperer does not harm through violence, but through the devastating power of its voice. Its whispered words are said to unravel the very fabric of sanity, leaving its victims broken, their bodies reduced to lifeless husks. The Whisperer is no ordinary apparition. It appears as a humanoid skeleton, its hollow eyes burning with an eerie glow. Its bony hand is perpetually raised to its lipless mouth in a gesture of silence, warning those who encounter it to never speak of what they hear. For those who dare to listen to its whispers are doomed to a fate worse than death, consumed by secrets that their minds cannot bear. Centuries ago, the valley was home to a prosperous village ruled by a reclusive sorcerer named Lorcan. Lorcan was an enigmatic figure, known for his mastery of dark magic and his obsession with life beyond death. He spent decades studying forbidden texts and performing rituals that blurred the line between the living and the dead. In his pursuit of immortality, Lorcan discovered an ancient ritual said to grant eternal life. However, the ritual required a steep price, the sacrifice of every soul within his domain. On the night of a blood moon, Lorcan enacted the ritual, summoning forces beyond his understanding. The village was consumed in an instant, its people reduced to shadows and ash. But Lorcan's victory was short-lived. The entities he summoned betrayed him, twisting his body into a skeletal form and binding his soul to the valley. Now known as the Whisperer, Lorcan roams the remnants of his home, seeking solace in the destruction of others. His whispers carry the weight of his guilt, laced with secrets and truths that no mortal mind can endure. In modern times, the valley and its tragic history have faded into obscurity, dismissed as mere folklore. But for a group of urban explorers, the legend was an irresistible challenge. Eleanor, a historian with a fascination for the occult; Marcus, a skeptical journalist; Clara, a tech-savvy investigator; Tom, a thrill-seeking cameraman; and Nina, a spiritual medium, ventured into the valley to uncover the truth. The group arrived under the cover of darkness, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. As they descended into the valley, the air grew colder, and a heavy silence enveloped them. The ruins of the village emerged from the fog, skeletal remains of houses standing like tombstones. "This place feels wrong," Nina whispered, clutching her protective amulet. The others dismissed her unease, eager to begin their exploration. As the group explored the ruins, strange phenomena began to occur. Marcus's flashlight flickered, its beam catching fleeting glimpses of shadows that moved on their own. Clara's equipment malfunctioned, her camera capturing distorted images of skeletal hands reaching out from the darkness. The first true encounter came when Tom wandered away from the group, his curiosity leading him to an old chapel at the edge of the village. Inside, he found a decayed altar and a strange symbol etched into the floor. As he bent down to examine it, a chilling voice whispered in his ear, "You shouldn't have come here." Tom spun around, but the chapel was empty. His breathing quickened as the whisper grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. He stumbled out of the chapel, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave," he said, his voice shaking. "There's something here." Ignoring Tom's warnings, the group pressed on, determined to document the phenomenon. Their exploration led them to the heart of the village, where a large, cracked well stood as a silent sentinel. As they approached, the air grew colder, and a faint whisper began to emanate from the well. Eleanor leaned over the edge, her curiosity overriding her fear. "It's just the wind," she said, but her voice faltered as the whisper transformed into words. "You cannot escape." The whisperer emerged from the shadows, its skeletal frame illuminated by an otherworldly glow. It raised a bony finger to its mouth, its hollow eyes boring into the group. "Be silent," it commanded, its voice both a whisper and a roar. Panic ensued. Marcus attempted to confront the entity, shouting questions in defiance. The whisperer turned to him, and with a single gesture, his voice was silenced. Marcus fell to his knees, clutching his throat as his skin withered, his body collapsing into a pile of bones. The remaining members fled, but the village had transformed into a labyrinth. The ruins shifted, closing off escape routes and guiding them deeper into the valley. Clara's equipment picked up strange frequencies, the whispers now audible even through her headphones. "They're inside my head," she cried, ripping the headphones off. Moments later, she vanished into the fog, her scream abruptly cut short. Eleanor, Tom, and Nina found themselves back at the well, their surroundings distorted as if reality itself was unraveling. The whisperer reappeared, its presence oppressive. "Your secrets are mine," it intoned, and the whispers grew deafening. Nina, the medium, tried to communicate with the entity, hoping to appease it. But the whisperer's voice consumed her, revealing truths about her past that drove her to madness. She clawed at her own skin, her eyes wild, before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Eleanor and Tom were the last. Desperate, they tried to destroy the well, believing it to be the source of the curse. But as they struck the stones, the whisperer loomed above them, its skeletal grin widening. "You cannot break what is eternal," it said, its voice echoing like a death knell. It reached for Tom, who fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as the whispers revealed his deepest fears. His body crumbled into ash, leaving Eleanor alone. Eleanor, clutching a fragment of Tom's camera, stared defiantly at the whisperer. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. The whisperer leaned close, its hollow eyes inches from her face. "Because you listened," it replied. With a final whisper, Eleanor's mind shattered. Her body remained frozen in a scream as her soul was drawn into the whisperer's eternal grasp. The valley remains a desolate place, its air heavy with the weight of countless lost souls. Travelers who venture too close report hearing whispers carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. Those who listen too closely are never seen again. And in the ruins of the village, the whisperer waits, its bony finger raised to its lips, ready to share its deadly secrets with the next unfortunate soul who dares to enter its domain. Beware the whisperer, for its voice is the harbinger of despair, and its secrets will claim you. Story 8. The Eternal Fields of Bones. In the most forsaken corners of the earth lies a cursed expanse known as the Bone Plains, where no life flourishes and the air carries the stench of decay. According to ancient legends, this land is not merely a resting place for the dead, but a realm where their restless souls reanimate as skeletal horrors, bound by an eternal curse. These bone creatures are not aimless. They march in an endless procession, driven by a hunger that can never be sated. Above them, Monstrous beings of unimaginable size, constructed from hundreds of skeletons fused together, hover silently, casting shadows that stretch endlessly over the plains. These guardians, known as the Bone Sentinels, are said to ensure that no intruder leaves alive. Those who hear the whispers of the Bone Plains are doomed to be lured into its clutches. And once they enter, they never return. Their screams of terror carried away by the howling winds, joining the symphony of despair that lingers over the land. Centuries ago, the Bone Plains were the heart of a flourishing empire called Velkaros, ruled by a tyrant king named Aldarion the Immortal. Obsessed with power and eternal life, Aldarion turned to the darkest magic to secure his dominion. His court sorcerers uncovered an ancient ritual that promised immortality, but at a terrible cost: the sacrifice of every living soul within his kingdom. On the night of the blood moon, Aldarion enacted the ritual. Blood flooded the streets as his soldiers slaughtered thousands, and the very soil of Velkaros absorbed their essence. As the final incantation was uttered, a massive rift opened in the skies above, releasing a surge of otherworldly energy. Aldarion believed he had achieved immortality, but the ritual backfired. Instead of eternal life, he and his kingdom were cursed. The people of Velkaros rose as skeletal beings, their souls imprisoned within their bones, doomed to wander the plains for eternity. Aldarion himself became the first Bone Sentinel, his towering skeletal form a grim reminder of his hubris. The land transformed into a barren wasteland where no mortal could enter without becoming part of its curse. In the present day, the Bone Plains are dismissed as a myth, a story told to frighten children and deter adventurers. But for a group of paranormal enthusiasts, the legend was an irresistible challenge. Eleanor, a historian obsessed with uncovering ancient truths; Marcus, a skeptic and journalist; Nina, a clairvoyant haunted by visions; Tom, a thrill-seeking cameraman; and Clara, a researcher in occult studies, set out to uncover the secrets of the Bone Plains. Equipped with state-of-the-art technology and driven by a mix of curiosity and ambition, the group ventured into the desolate region on a moonless night. As they crossed into the plains, the air grew unnaturally cold, and an eerie silence fell over them. The ground beneath their feet felt brittle, as though they were walking on the remains of something long dead. "Do you hear that?" Nina whispered, clutching her amulet. The others shook their heads, but as they ventured further, faint whispers began to rise on the wind. Words they couldn't understand, but somehow felt deep in their bones. The group soon stumbled upon a massive expanse of skeletal remains, piled high like waves frozen in time. In the center of the plain stood a colossal structure made entirely of bones, a twisted throne with a skeletal figure seated atop it. This was Aldarion, the first Bone Sentinel, his empty eyes glowing faintly as if watching them. Eleanor, enthralled by the sight, stepped closer to the throne. The moment her foot touched the ground before it, the plains came alive. The skeletal remains began to stir, piecing themselves together into humanoid forms. Thousands of hollow eyes turned toward the group, their lifeless stare sending chills down their spines. "We need to leave," Marcus said, his voice trembling. But the Bone Sentinels descended from the skies, their massive forms blocking every path of escape. One of the Sentinels reached down, its bony hand brushing against Marcus. He let out a blood-curdling scream as his body crumbled into dust, his soul ripped from him and absorbed into the Sentinel. Panicked, the group scattered, each fleeing in a different direction. But the plains shifted like a living maze, herding them back toward the throne. Nina, overwhelmed by the voices in her head, fell to her knees. The whispers grew louder, revealing secrets about her past she had buried deep within herself. As she screamed, the ground beneath her opened, and skeletal hands dragged her into the earth. Clara and Tom, now the only ones left with Eleanor, tried to form a plan. "There has to be a way to stop this," Clara said, flipping through an ancient text she had brought. According to the text, the only way to break the curse was to destroy Aldarian's throne. But doing so required a sacrifice. One of them had to offer their soul willingly. As the skeletal horde closed in, Tom took the decision into his own hands. "Get to the throne," he said, shoving Clara and Eleanor forward. "I'll hold them off." Before they could protest, Tom charged at the approaching skeletons, his flashlight swinging wildly. He managed to distract them long enough for Clara and Eleanor to reach the throne. But as they climbed its bony steps, Aldarian's towering form rose to block their path. "You cannot end what is eternal," Aldarian said, his voice resonating like the tolling of a bell. Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking. "This curse has lasted long enough. Take me instead." Aldarian paused, his skeletal grin widening. "A willing soul? How rare." He extended his hand, and Clara's body crumbled into ash as her soul was absorbed into the throne. For a moment, the plains grew silent, and the skeletal horde froze in place. Eleanor, now alone, believed the curse had been lifted, but as she turned to leave, she heard Aldarian's voice once more. "Fools, the curse does not end, it evolves." The throne began to shift, absorbing Clara's sacrifice and growing larger. The skeletal horde resumed its march, now more numerous and more relentless than before. Eleanor ran, her screams lost in the cacophony of rattling bones. When she reached the edge of the plains, she looked back one last time. The bone sentinels hovered above, their hollow eyes fixed on her. She realized the truth. She had not escaped. She had been marked, and the whispers would follow her wherever she went. To this day, the bone plains remain an enigma, drawing in the curious and the foolhardy. Those who venture too close claim to hear the faint sound of bones rattling, accompanied by whispers that seem to come from within their own minds. Few who enter return, and those who do are forever haunted by what they experienced. And deep within the plains, Aldarian sits upon his growing throne, his skeletal army ever expanding. The bone sentinels patrol the skies, their massive forms casting eternal shadows. The plains hunger for new souls, and the whispers continue to call. Beware the bone plains, for once you hear its call, your fate is already sealed. Story 9. The Cursed Cemetery. In a desolate corner of the world, hidden by dense forests and shrouded in eternal mist, lies a cemetery known as the Cursed Graveyard. This place, a forbidden domain of death, is said to be more than a resting place for the dead. It is a prison for the damned. Crooked crosses stand in rows, their wooden frames rotted and entangled with creeping vines, while the air hums with an unnatural stillness. The ground is perpetually cold, and every step feels like treading on something alive beneath the soil. Local legends speak of eerie whispers that echo through the cemetery at night, calling out to unsuspecting travelers. Those who enter seldom return, and the few who escape speak of maddening visions and the haunting cries of unseen entities. It is said that every grave here houses not just a body, but a restless soul bound to the earth by a powerful curse. Centuries ago, this land was a thriving village ruled by the Blackthorn family, a dynasty renowned for their cruelty and insatiable greed. Lord Edgar Blackthorn, the head of the family, was a man obsessed with power. He sought not only wealth, but dominion over life and death itself. Legends claim he turned to forbidden rituals, summoning a dark entity that promised him eternal dominion. To seal the pact, Edgar sacrificed his family's villagers, spilling their blood in a massive ritual. The ground turned crimson, and the spirits of the dead were bound to the soil, transforming the once thriving village into a cursed cemetery. But the dark entity betrayed Edgar, binding his soul and those of his family to the land as eternal wardens of the cursed ground. Over time, the cemetery grew. Those who perished nearby or dared trespass became unwilling inhabitants, their souls joining the Blackthorn family in their torment. The cursed cemetery became a labyrinth of death, where no soul could find peace and no intruder could escape. In the present day, the legend of the cursed cemetery is a tale told in whispers, dismissed as folklore. But for a group of thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts, it was the ultimate challenge. Eleanor, a writer fascinated by the macabre; Marcus, a skeptical journalist; Clara, an archaeologist intrigued by ancient curses; Nina, a medium haunted by persistent visions; and Tom, a fearless cameraman, decided to uncover the truth behind the cemetery's dark reputation. On a misty autumn night, they ventured into the forest, their equipment loaded and their minds brimming with anticipation. As they approached the cemetery gates, a sudden chill swept through the air. The ancient iron gates creaked open as though inviting them in. Beyond the threshold, rows of decayed crosses stretched endlessly, shrouded in an eerie fog. "It's just an old cemetery," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. The others remained silent, their unease growing as they stepped onto the cursed soil. The deeper they ventured, the louder the whispers became. At first, the voices were faint, indistinct murmurs carried by the wind. But as they neared the heart of the cemetery, the whispers grew clearer, calling out their names. "They know we're here," Nina whispered, clutching her protective amulet. Her face was pale and her eyes darted nervously. "The spirits are watching us." Ignoring her warnings, Eleanor and Marcus pressed on, drawn to a massive wooden cross in the center of the cemetery. Its surface was carved with cryptic symbols, and at its base lay an open grave, the soil freshly disturbed. "This is it," Eleanor said, her voice a mix of excitement and dread. "This must be where it all began." As she knelt to examine the symbols, the ground beneath them trembled. From the surrounding graves, skeletal hands burst forth, clawing their way to the surface. The air filled with the sound of cracking bones and guttural moans as the dead began to rise. Panic set in as the group realized they were surrounded. The skeletal figures moved with unnatural speed, their hollow eyes glowing with an unholy light. Marcus raised his camera, trying to document the unfolding horror, but the lens captured something far worse. Through the viewfinder, he saw the spirits of the damned, their faces twisted in agony, reaching out from the shadows. "We have to get out of here," Tom shouted, his voice trembling. But the cemetery had transformed into a maze, the paths shifting and closing off their escape. The whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices filled with anger and sorrow. Clara, clutching an ancient book of spells she had brought, desperately searched for a way to banish the spirits. "There's a ritual," she said, her hands shaking. "But it requires a sacrifice." As the group fought to hold off the advancing dead, Clara explained the ritual. One of them had to offer their soul willingly to break the curse. Marcus, driven by guilt and fear, volunteered. "If this is the only way to end it, then so be it," he said, stepping toward the massive cross. With trembling hands, Clara recited the incantation, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. As Marcus placed his hand on the cross, the ground erupted in a blinding light. The spirits froze, their hollow eyes fixed on Marcus as his body disintegrated into ash, his soul absorbed by the cursed soil. For a moment, silence fell over the cemetery. The skeletal figures crumbled, and the whispers ceased. It seemed the curse had been lifted. But as the group turned to leave, the ground began to quake once more. The massive cross split in two, revealing a dark chasm beneath. From the depths, a colossal figure emerged, the spirit of Edgar Blackthorne, his skeletal form towering above them. "You cannot end what has no end," he bellowed, his voice shaking the very earth. Nina screamed as the figure reached for her, his bony hand enveloping her in darkness. Clara and Tom ran, but the cemetery's paths shifted again, leading them in circles. One by one, the group fell to the wrath of the cursed spirits, their screams echoing into the night. Eleanor, the last survivor, stood frozen before Edgar's towering form. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. Edgar's hollow eyes burned with malice. "Because this land is mine, and now so are you." With a final earth-shaking roar, he crushed her beneath his skeletal fist, her soul joining the countless others bound to the cursed cemetery. To this day, the cursed cemetery remains untouched, a place of fear and legend. Travelers who venture too close report hearing whispers on the wind, calling their names and begging for release. Some say they see shadowy figures among the graves, their faces twisted in silent screams. And in the heart of the cemetery, Edgar Blackthorne sits upon a throne of bones, his hollow eyes ever watchful, waiting for the next souls to stumble into his domain. Beware the cursed cemetery, for once you enter, you become part of its eternal torment. Story 10. The Throne of the Blood Lord. In a land where the sun seldom shines and the skies remain eternally cloaked in stormy gray, there stands a fortress known as the Crimson Keep. Within its towering black spires lies the most fearsome relic of all, the throne of the Blood Lord. This throne is no mere seat of power. It is a construct of death itself. Forged from the bones of the vanquished and drenched in rivers of blood, it radiates a dark energy that binds the castle in perpetual shadow. Legends say the throne belongs to Lord Alastor, the Blood Lord, an immortal being of unimaginable power and cruelty. It is said that he does not sit upon the throne alone. His skeletal servants stand vigil at his side, and his crimson sword rests before him, dripping with the lifeblood of countless souls. Above the fortress, monstrous winged creatures circle endlessly, their shrieks piercing the silence and striking terror into the hearts of all who approach. To sit upon the throne is to accept the curse, to forfeit one's humanity and become a servant to the darkness. Few who dare to enter the Crimson Keep ever return, and those who do are broken, their minds shattered by the horrors they witnessed. Centuries ago, Lord Alastor was a mortal king who ruled over a vast and prosperous kingdom. But prosperity was not enough for him. He sought dominion over life and death itself. Alastor turned to forbidden magic, searching for a way to make his reign eternal. His quest led him to an ancient and malevolent deity known as Umbreus, the god of shadows. Umbreus offered Alastor a pact, eternal life and dominion in exchange for a single ritual, a blood sacrifice of every soul in his kingdom. Blinded by ambition, Alastor accepted. On the night of a blood moon, he performed the ritual in the heart of his castle. Thousands perished as their life essence was drained, their screams echoing across the land. Their bones fused into a grotesque throne, and their blood seeped into the very stones of the keep. But the ritual had a cruel twist. Alastor did not gain the immortality he desired as a man. Instead, his body was transformed into a skeletal form, and his soul was bound to the throne, cursed to rule over a kingdom of the dead. The Crimson Keep became a prison, its halls haunted by the spirits of the sacrificed, and Alastor's sword became a vessel of endless torment, feeding on the souls of those it struck down. In the modern age, the Crimson Keep is shrouded in myth and fear. Few believe it truly exists, but for a group of thrill-seekers, the legends were too tantalizing to ignore. Eleanor, a historian obsessed with uncovering lost truths. Marcus, a skeptic seeking to debunk the supernatural. Clara, an archaeologist drawn to the mystique of ancient curses. Tom, a daring filmmaker hungry for fame. And Nina, a clairvoyant plagued by visions, decided to seek out the keep and uncover its secrets. After months of research, they discovered the keep's location deep within an uncharted forest. Their journey began on a moonless night, the air thick with an unnatural chill. As they approached the keep, its black spires loomed against the stormy sky. The fortress seemed alive, pulsing with a dark energy that made their hearts race and their breaths shallow. "It's just a castle," Marcus said, trying to hide his unease. But the others knew better. The Crimson Keep was no mere ruin. It was a place where death reigned supreme. The group entered the keep through its towering iron gates, which creaked open as if welcoming them. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and iron. The grand hall stretched endlessly, its walls lined with skeletal remains embedded in the stone. At the far end stood the throne, bathed in an eerie crimson light. Alastor's figure sat motionless upon it, his skeletal form draped in tattered black robes. His crimson sword lay before him, its blade gleaming with fresh blood. As the group approached, the air grew colder and the whispers began. Faint at first, they grew louder with every step, until the voices of the damned filled the hall, their cries of anguish and despair echoing through the chamber. "This is a mistake," Nina said, clutching her protective amulet. "We need to leave." But it was too late. The throne had awakened. Alastor's hollow eyes flared with a fiery red light as he rose from the throne. His skeletal hand gripped the crimson sword, and his voice boomed through the hall. "You dare enter my domain. Your souls are forfeit." The ground beneath them trembled, and from the walls, skeletal figures began to emerge, their hollow eyes glowing with the same crimson light. The group scattered, but the keep's architecture seemed to shift, trapping them in an endless maze of corridors and chambers. Marcus, separated from the others, found himself in a chamber filled with mirrors. Each reflection showed a version of him dying in different horrific ways. The whispers grew louder until he could no longer distinguish them from his own thoughts. He screamed, and the mirrors shattered, the shards impaling him as his body disintegrated into ash. Clara and Tom, desperate to escape, stumbled upon an ancient tome in the library. The book contained a ritual that could potentially banish Alastor and end the curse, but it required a willing sacrifice. As the skeletal horde closed in, Clara made the ultimate decision. "Take this," she said, handing Tom the tome. "Finish the ritual." Before he could protest, she ran toward the throne, drawing the attention of Alastor and his minions. With a cry, she plunged a dagger into her chest, her blood spilling onto the stone floor. The crimson light of the throne flickered, and the skeletal figures froze. Tom and Eleanor, the last survivors, completed the ritual as the keep shook violently. Alastor roared in fury, his skeletal form cracking and splintering. For a moment, it seemed the curse was broken. But as the ritual concluded, the tome burned to ash, and Alastor's laughter filled the air. "You think you can destroy me?" he bellowed. "The throne is eternal, and now so are you." Tom was pulled into the throne, his body merging with its grotesque structure. Eleanor, paralyzed by terror, watched as the throne consumed him. Alastor's form regenerated, stronger than before. He stepped forward, his crimson sword aimed at her. "Your soul will fuel my reign," he said as he struck her down. The Crimson Keep remains, its black spires piercing the stormy skies. Travelers who dare venture near speak of hearing cries of anguish and the faint whispers of the damned. Some claim to see the Bloodlord himself, seated upon his throne, his crimson sword resting at his side, waiting for the next souls to wander into his domain. The throne endures, a symbol of eternal torment, and its curse grows stronger with every life it claims. To approach the Crimson Keep is to embrace death, for no one leaves unmarked.